Okay, so I'm Magna FPL and we've got some more price reveals. Starting off, we got Liverpool's prices. First of all, Mo Salah at 13 million, so a little bit of a price increase. I think he's still going to be in most teams, but I think with the 0.5 increase, if let's say Son comes in at 11.5, we already know De Bruyne is at 12. There is a question at whether saving the money's worth it. So I'm fairly happy with this price. Next up, we had Trent Alexander-Arnold. And really at 7.5, you're not making a decision. He normally scores over 200 points. And a player at 7.5 million who gets over 200 points, it's just a no-brainer. So I think Trent, it's a bit disappointing his price because they don't really make you make a decision. Then we've got Luis Diaz at 8 million. And it's hard to know what's going to be guaranteed front three. I think we all know that Salah is probably going to be starting on the right almost every game. But then up front, you've got Bobby Firmino, you've got Jota, you've got Darwin Núñez, and on the left, you've got Diaz and Jota. But Diaz did look at the end of last season to have that left wing spot as his own. So at 8 million for a starting Liverpool attacker, that's interesting. Looking at these 8 players here, there's a few interesting ones. First of all, Robertson. 0.5 less than Trent, and he actually scored more points per games when he played. Obviously, he was injured for the beginning of last season, so he had less games and less overall points. And to be honest, his underlying data for things like assists were actually worse. So I don't think he'll outscore Trent, but I think at 0.5 less, a guy who could get around that like 200 points mark, maybe him instead of Cancelo, the Liverpool double up. Less of a rotation risk, maybe. Then outside of that, we got Darwin Núñez and Jota as the forwards. And whoever's the starting forward out of those two is obviously an option. I think we imagine to be Darwin Núñez, but we don't actually know before the season. Maybe there's a bedding in process. So we don't know going into the season who's the starting one there. But I think they're both interesting because I think Jota, whenever he was getting game time last season, was a good option. And Darwin Núñez has great numbers in the Portuguese league, so I'm interested. And then finally, I think the only other interesting player here is Van Dijk. The cheapest guaranteed way into that Liverpool defence. Because with Matip, who was a really good budget option, not budget, but really good like hidden gem last year, we have the issue of Konate did start the Champions League final. So you'd imagine you don't go from starting the Champions League final to like being benched every game. So I think minutes will be available for Konate next year. But I think for me, the Liverpool triple up seems to be on. Next up, we had Man United's prices, and these were interesting. Starting off, Ronaldo went down to 10.5, which makes him somewhat viable. The problem for me with Ronaldo is he will just occasionally miss games. He's about 37, 38 now. And when he's playing, he'll put up good points per game. But it's just that risk of, well, we have to bench him because we've got 3 games this week. So I think at that premium price, I don't really consider him, at least off the bat. Maybe if United get some double game weeks, maybe you consider him. Next up, Bruno Fernandes comes in at a 10 million flat. Now, he was the highest scoring player, I think 2 seasons ago it was. So I like that he's come down. I think it's 2 million he's come down, or 2.5. I'm not sure what he started at. And he maybe is Man United's penalty taker. I don't know. Because I know it was him when Ronaldo first came in, but I think it might be Ronaldo now. I'm not too interested in Bruno just because of United's other mids. And here is one of them, Jadon Sancho, coming in at 7.5 million. Now this looks like it could be good. Now Jadon Sancho, I think out of United, because United have another budget mid who might be interesting, but Jadon Sancho I think is the more guaranteed one to get starts. And if we look at his numbers last year at Man United, 0.2 expected goals per 90, 0.19 expected assists, leaving him at 0.39 expected goal contributions per 90 in what was considered a very poor season. So those numbers are like actually okay for a player around his price. They're not good. We could easily see these numbers take a tick up. Because for context, at Dortmund, at times they were like anywhere from like 0.6 to nearly 0.9 he had a season. Like Sancho was ridiculously good at points for Dortmund. So Sancho's one to definitely keep your eye on. Then moving on to this big thing of players. I think there's a few interesting ones here. David De Gea at 5 million. Put up like a lot of save and bonus points at periods last year. I may prefer him to Ramsdale. I think he could really be a good option. Outside of that, we have a few United defenders, none of which I'm interested in off the bat. I think Varane doesn't really have any attacking potential. Then Telles and Shaw, you don't know who's going to be starting all the games. And then moving on to these midfielders, we've got Anthony Elanga at 5 million, who I mean, maybe could put up more minutes, could be an interesting option. and Marcus Rashford at 6.5. This is, I think, the biggest price decrease we've seen like from all the price reveals so far, and it could be juicy. If we look here at Rashford's numbers, and these are for last year, keep that in mind, these are per 90. He put up 0.21 goals and then 0.18 assists. So he was again at 0.39, same as Sancho. Now it's important to mention he didn't have too many minutes. He put up 1,200, which isn't a lot of minutes. For context, the year before he put up 2,900 minutes. So nowhere near, but it's another one where if he's starting under Ten Hag, you expect Man United to be better this year. He's one you have to consider for me. I think that's a really tempting price, and a starting attacker in even Man United last year got 6th with how bad they were. So just a starting attacker in the side that got 6th at 6.5 million, that's an interesting proposition. So Rashford is one to keep your eye on. Then moving on, we got the Wolves prices, and I think there's a few interesting options here. First of all, Raul Jimenez. Didn't have a great year last year, but I think he's an interesting one. He's a guaranteed like 90 minutes man up front. I think it was 2 years ago before the terrible like head injury. He put up like crazy numbers that year for goals and assists. And I think the reason his underlying numbers were so poor last year was more Wolves attack than him. I think I've heard murmurs that they could be maybe moving to a 4-back, although I think I've heard that every year since they've come up. Maybe this year we're going to a 4-back. I'm not too convinced that they are, but I mean, it's a possibility. And Jimenez, if Wolves become slightly more attacking, is an interesting one. Next up, Sarr in goal. For 5 million for me, I'm not too interested. Although he was brilliant last year with Wolves putting up quite a few clean sheets, I think De Gea and Ramsdale at the same price are more tempting to me. And I think then going down to someone at 4.5 like a David Raya is probably more tempting to me. I think Sarr, he's not a bad option, it's just the competition around him at that price. Then Johnny comes in at 4.5 million. A big character at Wolves. Someone who I know missed a lot of last year. He's a right back, but he can also play left back. But it's hard to know, at least from someone who doesn't follow Wolves, whether he would be the starting option going to next year. The way he's being talked about, I think he is preferred to Nori, who, if we continue on to here, is also a guy coming in at 4.5. And then you also have Kilman at 4.5, who was starting a lot last year. Then moving on to these mids, we've got one really interesting option, and that is Pedro Neto. If we look at his numbers here, these are for the season before last. And again, it's at 0.39. All these guys seem to be at 0.39 for goals and assists, like on expected numbers, which I mean is very good numbers for his price. Wolves have good fixtures to start with. The reason I'm not showing, his numbers from last year, because you may be like, oh, you're cherry picking. I'm actually doing the opposite, because his numbers last year would be 0.63 expected goal involvements per 90, but that's just because he only put up 450 minutes, and I don't believe he ever played 90 minutes last season. He was coming back from a big injury, but with a pre-season, gets to full fitness, he could be starting more games. So I think at that really budget price, he's an interesting option. As well as that, we've got Daniel Pedence, who I think at the same price is interesting, but I just prefer Neto. Okay, so next up we had the Villa prices, starting off with Coutinho at 7 million. Now, I think looking at Coutinho, he is probably the one I fancy most from Villa. Looking at his numbers, he's at 0.41 for expected goal contributions. And I think he's the only one out of that Villa attack who's guaranteed to start. I think the rest of them are minutes risk. And for that reason, I'm not too keen on any of them going into the season. Because looking through, next up we had Ollie Watkins at 7.5. I just think with Danny Ings, he's such a minutes risk. There's a good chance that he'll play on the left for big parts of like next year. I don't know, Ollie Watkins to me, it's just, he's not a guaranteed starter, and at that price, that automatically for me makes him a no. Even though when he does start and he's that main striker, he's a great option. Next up we had Matty Cash. Now Matty Cash and Luca Dean are both very attacking defenders, and if we go forward here, they are both at this 5 million mark. I mean, we saw like yesterday, Kyle Walker was 5 million. If Kyle Walker or like Cucurella at Man City are both starting a lot of games, I think for me they're obviously better. And looking at Diego Carlos at 5 million, I think 5 million is going to be the minimum to get a starter at Villa. And I think for me, when you can get into like Arsenal's defence at 4.5, maybe City's at 5. Outside of that, we have a few kind of interesting options. I think Jacob Ramsey, Buendia and Ings are all could be interesting, but aren't off the bat. First of all, Jacob Ramsey is a guy who put up like quite a few minutes for a young guy coming through. But he didn't even have 0.2 expected goal involvements per 90. Moving on, Buendia didn't have the year last year that many of us thought he might do, but he's obviously a good creator. If he can nail down a spot in that Villa team and start putting up decent numbers at $1 million cheaper than Coutinho, could be an option. And then finally we have Danny Ings, who, I mean, it's just another one. It's like Ollie Watkins. They're both each other's, like in terms of FPL, they both make each other bad options. Yeah, Villa are a lot of guys who may become options, but not a lot of guys who, off the bat, outside of Coutinho, you go, yeah, I want them in my team. Now moving on to the final team, Fulham. I think there isn't really much to talk about here. There's two players, so let's just talk about him. First of all, Mitrovic at 6.5, a fairly tempting option. Fulham have okay fixtures, definitely not good, but not as bad as Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth. So at 6.5 he could be one to consider. I think it's either him or Tony, to be honest. I think all the other forwards released so far around that price have a question mark. And then the only other real option is Harry Wilson at 6 million. Again, another guy who put up crazy goal and assists. I think it was 19 assists, 10 goals, around that. And those are really good numbers. So I think those two are two to consider. And I think if we go through the rest of these, like, you just don't really need to consider them. I think all of these, at most, you just keep an eye on going into the season. I don't think any of these you go, okay, off the bat, they're in my team. Okay, so that was it for today's videos. Day 2 of price releases. If you did enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm coming at you all season with FPL content. And I know I thanked you yesterday for 100 subscribers, but I just want to thank you again, because it's a big milestone. Anyway, thank you for watching.